The wind in the Texas Panhandle did not merely blow, it scoured. It carried a grit that settled into the deep lines of the porch posts, into the folds of fresh laundry, and between the teeth of anyone foolish enough to speak with their mouth open. It was the year 1874, and the drought had turned the earth near the Red River into a cracked mosaic of red clay and despair. Clara Hollis straightened her back, feeling the familiar pop of her spine, and wiped her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. She was 24 years old, though the sun and the wind had conspired to etch fine lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Standing by the well, she looked out over the flat horizon where the heat shimmered like water, a cruel mirage for a land that had not seen a proper rain in 3 months. The Hollis Way Station was a modest establishment, a stubborn blister on the landscape consisting of a main house, a stable large enough for 6 horses, and a corral that currently held only a milk cow named Bess, and a gelding that had seen better days. It was a place for the stagecoaches to swap teams and for weary travelers to wash the dust from their throats. But lately, the road had been quiet, too quiet. "Stop staring at the nothing. Clara!" Her mother's voice cut through the dry air. "Nothing stares back if you look too long." Martha Hollis stood in the doorway of the main house, wiping her hands on a stained apron. At 46, Martha was as hard and unyielding as the mesquite trees that dotted the plains. She was a woman carved from grief and survival. She had watched her husband die 15 years ago, shot down by a stray bullet in a dispute over a property line that no longer existed. That memory had calcified her heart. To Martha, the world outside their fence line was a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Clara picked up the water buckets, the heavy wooden handles biting into her palms through the leather gloves. "I was just looking for the stage. Mama, it is late. It should have been here by noon." "The stage is late because the world is broken," Martha said, turning back into the dim cool of the kitchen. "Bring that water in. The beans are dry, and we need to soak them if we want to eat tonight." Clara lugged the water toward the house. The weight was familiar, a constant companion since she was a girl. Inside, the kitchen was dark, the shutters drawn against the afternoon glare. The room smelled of dried sage, old wood, and the perpetual scent of boiling lye soap. As Clara poured the water into the ceramic basin, her boot caught on the edge of the loose floorboard near the pantry. It clattered loudly, a wooden slap against the joist. "I told you to fix that," Martha snapped. Though her tone lacked real heat, it was just the rhythm of their lives. Clara knelt, pushing the wide plank of pine back into place. "I need nails. Mama, we used the last ones on the stable roof." Underneath that plank lay the root cellar, a dark, cool hole dug into the earth. It was meant for potatoes and onions, to keep them from spoiling in the heat or freezing in the sudden drops of winter. Currently, it holds 3 sacks of shriveled potatoes and a few jars of preserved peaches, the last of their wealth. That dark space was a secret mouth on the floor, covered up and walked over 100 times a day. "We will not buy nails," Martha said, stirring the pot on the cast-iron stove. "Not until the stage pays the contract fee. We have $4.50 in the tin. That has to last until the end of the month." $4.50. Clara felt the number settle in her chest like a stone. The tax assessor from the county seat was due in 2 weeks. The taxes on the land were $12. The arithmetic of their survival was simple and cruel. They were falling short. Clara moved to the window, peering through the slat. "Mister, Rourke rode by the fence line again this morning. He stopped and looked at the north pasture for a long time." Martha's spoon stopped moving. The silence in the kitchen stretched, heavy and suffocating. Silas Rourke was the owner of the Bar T, a cattle operation that was slowly swallowing the county like a snake eating an egg. He was a man who smiled with his mouth, but never with his eyes. "Let him look," Martha said finally, her voice low. "Looking is free, taking blood costs." "He says the land is worth less every day," Clara said, repeating the words she had heard Rourke shout to his foreman when they thought she was out of earshot. "He says, with the Indian raids picking up, a foreclosure is safer than a scalping." Silas Rourke is a vulture, Martha spat. He circles. He waits for something to die. We are not dead, Clara, and we are not selling. Your father is buried on that hill. I will not sell his bones to a man who counts cattle like he counts souls. But the fear was there. Clara saw it in the way her mother's hand trembled slightly before she gripped the spoon again. The fear was their third roommate. It sat at the table with them, slept in their beds, and whispered in the wind. The town of adobe walls was miles away. And out here, the law was as thin as paper. Later that afternoon, the sound of hooves thundered on the hard-packed earth. It was not the rhythmic, heavy clatter of the stagecoach team, but the frantic, uneven beat of a single rider. Clara wiped her hands and grabbed the Winchester rifle from above the door frame. It was an automatic reflex. In the Panhandle, an unexpected visitor was a threat until proven otherwise. She stepped onto the porch, the rifle held low but ready. A man on a lathered bay horse skidded to a halt at the gate. Dust billowed around him in a red cloud. It was Weary Tom, a rider for the mail service. His hat was gone, and his face was streaked with sweat and grime. "Water," he croaked. "For the love of God! Miss Clara, water!" Clara lowered the rifle and signaled to the trough. "Help yourself. Tom, what happened? Where's the coach?" Tom slid from the saddle, his legs wobbling as he led the horse to the water. He let the beast drink for a moment before pulling its head up to prevent it from bloating. Then he cupped his hands and drank greedily himself. Martha came out to the porch, her arms crossed. "You are running that horse to death. Tom, what is chasing you?" Tom wiped his mouth with a dirty sleeve. He looked at the two women, his eyes wide and white in his dust-caked face. "They hit the stage, Mrs. Hollis, 6 miles east, near the canyon dip." "Who?" Martha asked, her voice turning to steel. "Comanche," Tom whispered, looking over his shoulder at the empty horizon. "Had to be. Arrows on the side of the coach. The driver's dead. Shot right through the throat. They took the horses and cut the traces. I was at a riding point 1/2 mile ahead. I heard the shots and doubled back just in time to see them riding off into the ridges." Clara felt a cold chill despite the oppressive heat. "Did you see them clearly?" Tom hesitated. I saw shapes, feathers, paint. It was chaos. Miss Clara. But who else would it be? Silas Rourke's men passed me an hour before. They warned me that a war party had broken off from the reservation. Said they were looking for blood. "Rourke's men," Clara repeated, exchanging a look with her mother. "You are sure it was Comanche?" Martha pressed, stepping down one stair. "You saw the paint." "I saw enough to know I ain't staying out here tonight," Tom said, shivering. "I am riding for the sheriff in town. You ladies, you should pack a bag. Come with me. It is not safe." "This is our home," Martha said instantly. "We do not run because of rumors. Ain't a rumor when there is a dead man on the road." "Ma'am," Tom said, climbing back into the saddle with a groan. "Sheriff Pratt will send a posse. But until then, you bar the doors. You hear me? Bar them tight." He spurred his horse and galloped west, leaving a fresh cloud of dust to settle over the station. The silence that followed was louder than the wind. Clara looked at the horizon again. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The beauty of the west was always terrifying. It looked like a wound. "Get the animals in," Martha ordered, her voice devoid of emotion. "And bring extra wood. We are not lighting the lantern tonight. We sit in the dark." Clara moved to the stable. Her hands were steady, but her stomach churned. The mention of Comanches tapped into a primal fear that every settler in the territory shared. Stories of raids were told like ghost stories around fires, tales of captives, of torture, of sudden violence that struck like lightning. But as she led the gelding into his stall, a thought nagged at her. Tom had said Rourke's men had warned him. Rourke's men were always the first to know, always the first to warn, and always the first to offer to buy the land of the grieving survivors for pennies on the dollar. She pitched hay into the manger, the dry stalks rustling. The stable was her sanctuary. It smelled of sweet hay and horse sweat, a smell that grounded her. She checked the bolt on the rear door, ensuring it was rusted shut as always. "You keep your ears open tonight, boy," she whispered to the gelding, stroking his velvet nose. He nickered softly, bumping her shoulder. When she returned to the house, the sun was half gone. A rider was approaching from the west this time, moving at a leisurely trot. The silhouette was unmistakable broad shoulders, a high-crowned hat, and a posture of arrogant ownership. Silas Rourke. He did not come alone. Two of his hands, men with low-slung gun belts and eyes that wandered too freely, rode a few paces behind him. Rourke stopped at the gate but did not dismount. He knew better than to step onto Martha Hollis's porch without an invitation. Clara stood on the porch, the rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. Martha stood beside her, a butcher knife tucked into the fold of her apron. "Evening, ladies," Rourke called out. His voice was rich and deep, like molasses poured over gravel. He was a handsome man in a jagged sort of way, 50 years old with a silver streaking his dark beard. "Bad business on the road today." "We heard," Martha said. "What do you want, Silas?" "Just checking on my neighbors," Rourke said, resting his hands on the horn of his saddle. "Sheriff Pratt is organizing a posse. He will be sweeping the area. But a posse is slow, and savages are fast." "We are armed," Clara said. Her voice surprised her. It was steady. Rourke turned his gaze to her. His eyes were pale blue, cold and assessing. He looked at her not as a woman, but as another asset he had not yet acquired. "A rifle is good, Miss Clara, but 10 rifles are better. My offer stands. You sell the deed to me. I pay off your tax line, and I give you $500 cash. You can move into town, get a room at the boarding house, live civilized." $500, Martha scoffed. "The land is worth $2,000, and you know it. Not with a war party in the gully." "It is not," Rourke said, his smile tightening. "And not when the water table is dropping. I am trying to help you." "Martha, you are 2 women alone. It is unnatural. It invites trouble. The only trouble we have is the kind that rides up to our gate and talks too much," Martha snapped. Rourke's expression hardened. The veneer of neighborly concern cracked, revealing the iron underneath. "Have it your way, but when the night comes, and you hear them screaming, do not say I did not try to save you. Pratt is looking for a Comanche, young buck, they say, one that got away from the fight at the coach. If he is out there, he is desperate, and a desperate savage is a dangerous thing." He tipped his hat, a mocking gesture. "Lock your doors." He turned his horse and rode away, his men following. Clara watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. The threat was not subtle. Rourke was not afraid of the Comanches. He was using them. He was using the fear of them to suffocate the station. "He knows something," Clara said quietly. "He knows he wants this water source," Martha said, turning back to the door. "He wants the aquifer under this house. The cattle need water, and the creeks are dry. He would burn us out if he thought he could get away with it." They ate dinner in the fading light, cold cornbread, and the last of the salted pork. They did not light the oil lamp. To light a lamp was to make a target of the window. The wind picked up as true night fell. It rattled the loose shingles on the roof and whistled through the gaps in the chinking. The house groaned, settling into the earth. Clara washed the dishes in the dark by feel. She knew every chip in the ceramic, every dent in the tin basin. She moved to the pantry to put away the remaining cornmeal. As she stepped, her foot found the loose board again. Thud, clack. She paused. The sound seemed louder in the dark. She knelt and pried the board up with her fingertips. The air from the cellar drifted up, smelling of earth and cool dampness. It was a black void. "Leave it," Martha called from her bedroom. "Come to bed. Clara, you need to sleep. If they come, the dog will bark." Clara pushed the board back. They didn't have a dog. The old hound had died last winter, and they didn't have the heart or the money to replace him. Martha was speaking out of habit, or perhaps out of a wish for a protection that wasn't there. Clara went to her small room at the back of the house. She did not undress. She took off her boots but kept her trousers and shirt on. She lay on top of the quilt, the Winchester propped against the nightstand. Sleep did not come. Her mind was a whirl of images, the dust on Tom's face, the cold blue of Rourke's eyes, the empty horizon that felt like it was holding its breath. The Comanche, the word itself was heavy. In the newspapers from the east that sometimes fell off the stage, the Comanches were painted as monsters, demons of the plains. But Clara had lived in Texas all her life. She knew that fear often wore a mask. She remembered her father saying once, "A man will kill you for your boots and blame it on the tribe to save his neck." Was there really a war party? Or was it just Rourke's men, wearing paint and feathers to scare the county into selling? The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound. It sounded like a woman crying, or a wolf searching for a pack that was no longer there. Clara closed her eyes, trying to force her breathing to slow. The house felt fragile, a tiny box of wood floating in a sea of grass and violence. She thought of the taxes. $12. They were short $7.50. If the stage line canceled the contract because of the danger, they would have zero. They would lose the land. The land was all they had. It was the only thing that made them Hollis and not just two beggars on the street. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor of her room. The wind began to die down, replaced by a heavy, static silence that often preceded a storm. The air grew thick. Clara shifted, her eyes snapping open. She stared at the ceiling. She had heard something. It was not the wind. It was not the settling of the house. It was a sound from outside, a scrape, the friction of something dragging against the rough wood of the stable wall. Clara sat up, her heart leaping into her throat. She held her breath, straining her ears. There it was again, a soft thud, like a body hitting the earth, or a boot stepping carefully. She swung her legs off the bed, her stockinged feet silent on the floor. She grabbed the rifle. The cold steel barrel was the only solid thing in a world that felt suddenly fluid and dangerous. She moved to the window and peered through the crack in the curtains. The yard was bathed in pale moonlight. The corral was empty. The cow and horse were in the barn. The gate was closed. But the stable door, the small side door she used to muck out the stalls, was slightly ajar. It was moving, swaying just an inch in the still air. She had latched that door. She remembered the click of the iron. Someone was in the stable. Terror, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. It could be Rourke's men. Come to set a fire. It could be a coyote after the chickens, or it could be the monster Tom had whispered about. Clara looked toward her mother's room. If she woke Martha, Martha would scream or shoot blindly. Martha's fear was a blunt instrument. Clara needed to be a scalpel. She needed to know what was out there before she started a war she couldn't finish. She pulled on her boots, her fingers trembling as she laced them. She grabbed the heavy iron key to the back door, taking a breath that tasted of dust and fear. She crept out of her room, through the dark kitchen, past the loose floorboard that hid the empty cellar. She unlocked the back door, the mechanism well-oiled and silent. She stepped out into the night. The air was cooler now, charged with electricity. A storm was brewing in the north, invisible but palpable. Clara raised the rifle to her shoulder, her finger resting on the trigger guard. She moved across the yard, stepping where the dirt was softest to mask her approach. The stable loomed ahead, a black shape against the stars. She reached the side of the barn and pressed her back against the rough wood. She listened. Inside, the gelding stamped his hoof. He was agitated. And then, a sound that froze Clara's blood, a low, pained groan. Humans! It was not the snarl of a beast or the whispered curse of a thief. It was the sound of something dying. Clara hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run back to the house, to bar the door, to wait for morning. But curiosity, and a strange, stubborn courage that she didn't know she possessed, held her fast. She moved to the ajar door. With a swift motion, she kicked it open and leveled the rifle at the darkness inside. "Come out," she ordered, her voice cracking slightly but loud enough to echo in the rafters. "I have a Winchester and I know how to use it." Silence answered her. Then, a rustle in the straw near the empty stall where they used to keep the feed. "I said, come out." Clara cocked the lever of the rifle. The mechanical clack-clack was a universal language. A shape moved in the shadows. It was small, no, not small, but huddled. It dragged itself into the sliver of moonlight falling through the open loft door. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. It was a boy, or a young man, barely older than herself. He was slumped against the wooden partition. He wore a torn shirt that was dark with liquid blood. She realized with a jolt. His breathing was ragged, a wet, rattling sound. He tried to push himself up, his arms shaking violently, but collapsed back into the straw. He lifted his head, and the moonlight caught his face. He had high cheekbones and dark skin. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, though matted with sweat and dirt. Clara froze. The description from Tom, the warnings from Rourke, the terror of the town, it all coalesced into this single, shivering figure. A Comanche. He was here, the enemy, the savage, the killer of stagecoach drivers. He looked up at her, his eyes glassy with fever and pain. He did not snarl. He did not reach for a weapon. He looked terrified. He was bleeding to death in her barn. Clara stood there, the rifle pointed at his chest. This was the moment. She should shoot, or she should back away, lock the door, and get her mother. It was the law. It was survival. But the young man didn't look like a war party. He looked like a broken thing. "Water," he whispered. The word was English, but it was shattered, barely recognizable. Clara's grip on the rifle did not loosen, but her finger eased off the trigger. She heard the sound of horses in the distance far off, but approaching fast. A posse, or Rourke's men, they were coming. She looked at the boy, then at the open door, then back at the boy. The wind kicked up again, swirling the dust around her boots. If they found him here, they would hang him. And then they would ask why the Hollis women had a savage in their barn. They would say she harbored him. They would take the land. The choice hung in the air, heavy as the coming storm. Clara lowered the barrel of the rifle 1 inch. "Can you walk?" she hissed, the decision made before she even understood why. The boy blinked, confusion clouding his gaze. "They are coming," Clara whispered urgently, stepping into the barn. "Get up. You cannot stay here." She didn't know it yet, but as she stepped across the threshold of the stable, she was stepping across a line that could never be uncrossed. The road to the gate had brought something to her door, and everything was about to change. The thunder that had been threatening all evening finally broke, cracking the sky open like a dry gourd. The rain did not fall. It was driven sideways by the gale, stinging Clara's face as she half carried, half dragged the stranger across the yard. He was heavier than he looked. His arm was draped over her shoulder, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground. Every few steps, his knees buckled, and Clara had to grit her teeth, tightening her grip around his waist to keep him from collapsing into the mud. "Keep moving," she hissed against the wind. "If you fall, I cannot pick you up." The sound of hoofbeats was swallowed by the storm, but Clara knew they were out there. Riders were close, in the chaos of the dark and the rain. Her mind worked frantically to categorize the body pressing against her. He was wearing trousers made of rough wool and a cotton shirt that was shredded and soaked in dark, metallic-smelling blood. In the flashing lightning, she saw no feathers, no war paint, only dirt, blood, and the desperate, terrified eyes of a boy no older than 20. He was not a monster. He was not at the war party. He was likely a Mexican drover, separated from a herd during the raid, or perhaps a young hand from one of the southern ranches who had been caught in the crossfire of the stagecoach robbery. He was a victim, just like the dead driver on the road. "Almost there," she gasped. They reached the back porch. Clara kicked the door open, struggling to maneuver his dead weight over the threshold. They spilled into the kitchen, a tangle of wet limbs and heavy breathing. Clara shoved the door shut and threw the bolt. leaning her back against the wood for a fleeting second to catch her breath. The kitchen was pitch black, smelling of cold ash and the ozone of the storm. "Quiet," she whispered, though the thunder overhead was loud enough to rattle the jars on the shelf. She grabbed him by the shirt collar and hauled him toward the pantry. He groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure agony. "Do not make a sound," she warned, her voice trembling. "My mother sleeps lightly." She reached down and pried up the loose floorboard, then the one next to it, revealing the black maw of the root cellar. The air that drifted up was cool and smelled of earth and old potatoes. "Down," she ordered, gesturing to the hole. The boy looked at the dark space, then at her. He seemed to understand the urgency, if not the words. He slid toward the opening, lowering himself painfully. Clara grabbed his wrist to steady him as he found the ladder. His skin was burning hot, feverish even through the rain chill. Once his head disappeared below the joists, Clara worked quickly. She replaced the boards, stomping on the loose one to wedge it tight. She grabbed a rag from the counter and dropped to her knees, scrubbing at the muddy drag marks and the droplets of blood on the floor. It was too dark to see clearly, so she scrubbed by feel, praying the shadows would hide what she missed. She had just thrown the dirty rag into the wood box when the door to the bedroom creaked open. Martha Hollis stood there in her nightgown, holding a candle that flickered in the draft. Her other hand held the revolver she kept under her pillow. "Clara," Martha's voice was sharp. "I heard the door. Who is out there?" Clara stood up, smoothing her wet hair back from her face. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "The wind blew the latch on the stable. Mama, I had to go secure it. The storm is bad." Martha narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. The candlelight caught the shine of water on Clara's coat. "You went out in this. You are soaked." "I could not leave the gelding spooked." Clara lied, the words tasting like copper on her tongue. "The door was banging." Martha looked at the back door, then at the floor where Clara had been scrubbing. The shadows were deep enough. "I thought I heard voices. Just the wind. Mama, it is howling like a banshee." Martha stood still for a long moment, the instinct of a woman who had survived too much warring with the logic of the moment. Finally, she lowered the gun. "Dry yourself off. If you catch a lung fever, we cannot afford the doctor." Clara nodded, watching her mother retreat. Only when the bedroom door clicked shut did she let out the breath she had been holding. She looked down at the floorboards. Beneath her feet, a man was bleeding in the dark. She had hidden a stranger, a victim. She told herself it was the Christian thing to do. She told herself she was saving a boy from the same bandits who had robbed the mail. She did not sleep that night. She sat in a chair by the window, the Winchester across her lap, watching the lightning tear the sky apart. The morning brought a sky scrubbed clean of clouds, a hard, brilliant blue that hurt the eyes. The mud in the yard was already beginning to crust over in the heat. They came for breakfast. Clara was stirring oatmeal when the dogs newly borrowed from a neighbor started barking. She looked out the window to see 6 men riding through the gate. At the front was Sheriff Gideon Pratt. Pratt was a heavy man, his weight settling into his saddle like a sack of grain. He had a face that had once been kind but had sagged into perpetual exhaustion. Beside him rode 2 of his deputies, and flanking them were 3 men Clara did not know, hard-eyed men with dusters tied back to reveal heavy pistols, bounty hunters, or perhaps mercenaries hired by the stage line. "Coffee, Clara," Martha said, standing up from the table. She did not look afraid. She looked annoyed. "Get the cups. I will handle Gideon." Martha walked out onto the porch as the men dismounted. Clara followed, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped them on her apron. She forced herself to stand tall. "Sheriff," Martha greeted him, not offering a hand. "You are riding early." "Morning, Martha." "Miss Clara," Pratt said, taking off his hat. He looked uncomfortable. "Sorry to disturb your breakfast. We are trailing a fugitive." "The Comanche?" Clara asked. She leaned against the porch post, trying to appear casual. "Tom told us about the stagecoach." "That is right." Pratt said, wiping sweat from his brow. "A bad business. Driver dead. Guard missing. We tracked a blood trail 5 miles west before the rain washed it out, but the tracks were heading this way. One of the strangers, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stepped forward. He looked at the house with hungry, predatory eyes. 'We need to search the property. Ma'am, the savage is wounded. He would look for shelter.' 'You think I have a Comanche in my parlor?' Martha asked, her voice dripping with scorn. 'I would have shot him before he passed the gate.' 'We have to be sure, Martha,' Pratt said apologetically. 'For your own safety. If he is hiding in your barn or your shed—' 'Search the barn,' Martha said, waving a hand. 'Search the outhouse if you like, but do not track mud into my home.' The men spread out. Clara's heart stopped as she watched 2 of them head for the stable. They would find the blood in the straw. They would find the disturbed hay. She had to distract them. 'Sheriff,' Clara said loudly, stepping off the porch. 'Tom said the driver was shot in the throat. Did he suffer?' Pratt looked at her, blinking. 'Tom talks too much. Yes, shot through the neck, .44 caliber, heavy slug, tore him up badly, died instantly.' Clara frowned slightly. 44, I thought Comanches used arrows or old trade muskets.' 'This one had a Henry rifle,' the scarred man called out from near the woodpile. 'Stole it, likely.' 'And the time,' Clara pressed, trying to keep Pratt's eyes on her and away from the barn. 'When did it happen?' 'Noon yesterday,' Pratt said confidently. 'The sun was high. That is what the passenger said.' Something clicked in Clara's mind, a small, jagged piece of a puzzle that did not fit. Tom had arrived yesterday afternoon saying the attack had just happened. But if it was noon, Tom would have been here hours earlier. And a .44 caliber slug. The wound she had glimpsed on the boy in the barn was a tear, a jagged rip, not the clean punch of a heavy bullet. 'Clear here,' one of the deputies shouted from the barn. Clara nearly sagged with relief. The storm must have blown rain through the open loft door and washed the blood into the straw and muck, or the shadows were just deep enough. 'Clear out back,' another man called. Pratt put his hat back on. 'Satisfied. Gentlemen, Martha. Again, I apologize, but you keep your eyes peeled. This boy, this Indian, he is dangerous. He killed a good man yesterday. If you see anything at all, you fire a shot into the air. We will be sweeping the creek bed.' 'We will be fine, Gideon,' Martha said. 'Just catch him.' The scarred man lingered a moment longer, staring at Clara. He chewed on a toothpick, his eyes sliding over her in a way that made her skin crawl. 'You check your cellar, miss. Sometimes rats crawl in deep.' Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She forced a tight smile. 'We checked it for snakes this morning. Only potatoes down there.' The man grunted, then turned and mounted his horse. The posse rode out, a cloud of dust following them like a shroud. Clara waited until they were a speck on the horizon before she turned back to the house. Martha was already inside, clearing the table. 'Fools,' Martha muttered. 'Chasing ghosts in the daylight?' Clara did not answer. She waited until Martha went out to feed the chickens. Then she grabbed a pitcher of water and a tin cup. She took a piece of leftover cornbread and wrapped it in a napkin. She bolted the front door. She went to the pantry and knelt. Her hands were steady now, fueled by a cold, hard resolve. She pried up the loose board. 'Hey,' she whispered into the dark. No answer. She pried up the second board, allowing a shaft of morning sunlight to cut through the gloom of the cellar. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, falling like a spotlight onto the figure huddled in the corner. Clara gasped, the sound dying in her throat. In the daylight, there was no mistake. There was no Mexican drover. The boy was slumped against a sack of potatoes. He had stripped off the ruined shirt to bind his wound. His chest was bare, copper-skinned and lean, but it was his hair that stopped her heart. It was long, black, and braided with intricate care. Leather thongs were woven into the plaits, adorned with small silver beads and a single, bright blue feather on his arm. A band of beaten silver caught the light, on his chest. Faint lines of paint, black and ochre, were smeared but visible. He was Comanche. He was the enemy. He was the monster the posse was hunting. He was the reason the stagecoach driver was dead. Clara recoiled, scrambling back on her heels. The pitcher nearly tipped over. Panic, hot and sudden, flooded her chest. She had brought a wolf into the fold. She had lied to the sheriff. She was a traitor to her own race, to her own mother. The boy opened his eyes. They were dark, unfathomable, and filled with pain. He looked at her, then at the light, then back at her. He did not move to attack. He did not look like a killer. He looked like a frightened animal cornered in a trap. He saw the fear in her face. He saw her glance toward the door where the gun hung. He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his side. He raised one hand, palm out, a universal gesture of peace or surrender. "No," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. Clara stared at him. You are one of them." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He pointed to the water pitcher. Clara hesitated. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get Martha, to call Pratt back. If Rourke found out, if the town found out, the Hollis station would be burned to the ground. They would hang her alongside him. But then she remembered Pratt's words. 44 caliber. Noon. She looked at the wound on the boy's side. The bandage he had made from his shirt was soaked through, but she could see the edge of the injury. It wasn't a hole. It was a gash, a grazing wound, perhaps, or something torn by debris. It didn't look like a direct hit from a buffalo rifle. If a .44 had hit a boy this slight, he wouldn't be sitting up. He would be dead. And the blood in the barn last night had been fresh. If he had been shot at noon, 12 hours before she found him, he would have bled out miles away. Someone was lying. "Water," the boy said again. Then, searching for the words, he added, "No. Kill." He didn't mean he wouldn't kill. He was begging her not to kill him. Clara looked at his hand. It was shaking. There was no malice in his face, only a desperate, naked will to live. She was standing on a precipice. On one side was the law, safety, and the approval of her community. On the other side was this boy, this stranger who had dragged himself into her barn to die. If she gave him up, Pratt would hang him. They wouldn't ask questions about the time or the bullet. They would see the braids and the paint, and that would be the trial and the sentence. "No kill," he whispered again, his eyes closing as his strength failed. Clara let out a shaky breath. She looked toward the front door, where the world of white men and laws existed. Then she looked back down into the dark hole. She reached for the pitcher. "Here," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. She lowered the cup down to him. He took it with trembling fingers, drinking so fast she thought he would choke. When he finished, he looked up at her with an expression of gratitude that needed no language. "One night," Clara whispered, more to herself than to him. "I will give you one more night. Then you go." She did not know, as she slid the floorboards back into place, sealing him into the darkness beneath her feet, that she had just made a decision that would outlast the night. She had decided to trust her eyes over her fears, and, in the Texas Panhandle, that was the most dangerous thing a woman could do. The days that followed the storm were a blur of heat and suffocating tension. The cellar, once a place for silent potatoes and jars of preserves, had become the center of Clara Hollis's universe. It was a gravitational point that pulled at her attention every second of the day. Every footstep her mother took across the kitchen floor sent a spike of adrenaline through Clara's veins. Every creak of the house settling in the wind sounded like an accusation. Clara established a routine born of necessity. She would wait until the afternoon heat drove Martha to her nap in the back bedroom. Then, moving with the stealth of a thief in her own home, Clara would boil water, tear strips from an old petticoat, and descend into the dark. The first time she really looked at the wound, the smell of copper and old blood filled the cramped space. The young man lay on a pallet of burlap sacks she had hastily arranged. He was awake. He was always awake when she came down, his eyes tracking her movement in the dim light of the single candle she dared to light. "I need to clean it," Clara whispered, kneeling beside him. She kept the basin of warm water between them like a shield. He watched her, his expression unreadable. The fever had broken slightly, leaving his skin slick with sweat, but his eyes were clear. They were dark, intense, and held a fierce intelligence that unsettled her. He did not flinch when she applied the wet cloth to his side, though she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten until they were like iron bands. She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear along his ribs where flesh had been ripped away. It was angry and red at the edges, but, as she had suspected, it was not a bullet hole. It looked like he had been raked by something sharp, perhaps a branch during a fall or a piece of shrapnel from an explosion. "This needs stitching," she murmured, more to herself than him. "But I am not a doctor. I can only bind it." He reached out then, his hand moving with sudden speed to grip her wrist. Clara gasped, freezing. His grip was not aggressive, but it was firm. He looked at the cloth in her hand, then took it from her. He took the needle and thread she had brought, his fingers long and dexterous, with a stoicism that made Clara's stomach turn. He began to sew the edges of his own torn shirt, pulling the fabric tight to act as a compression bandage over the dressing. He did not ask for help. He did not make a sound. He simply did what needed to be done to survive. "You are proud," Clara said softly. He looked up, pausing in his work. He tapped his chest. "Tosawi." Clara frowned, trying to replicate the sound. It was guttural, fluid, a sound like wind moving through canyon rocks. "Tosawi." He shook his head slightly, a flicker of amusement, or perhaps pity for her clumsy tongue crossing his face. He repeated it, but the syllables were too foreign, too complex for her to grasp in a whisper. "I cannot say that," Clara admitted. She looked at him, searching for something to call him other than him or savage or the mistake. "I will call you Noah." He tilted his head. "No. Ah. Yes, Noah. In my book. He built a great boat to save life from the rain." She gestured vaguely upward, toward the memory of the storm that had brought him here. "You survived the rain. It fits." He seemed to consider this, testing the weight of the name on his tongue. "Noah," he repeated. It was a temporary name, a survival name, just as the cellar was a temporary grave he was living in. But he accepted it with a nod. The internal conflict gnawed at Clara constantly. When she was above the floorboards, she felt the crushing weight of her secret. She was a settler woman, the daughter of a man killed by violence that this boy's people were blamed for. Every time she looked at Martha, she felt a stab of guilt so sharp it nearly brought her to her knees. She was endangering her mother's life for a stranger. But when she was down in the dark, watching Noah force himself to sit up, watching him conserve his water, watching the way he refused to touch the jar of peaches until she explicitly offered it to him, the fear shifted. He was not a monster. He was a young man with terrified eyes and a warrior's pride who was being hunted like a dog. 2 days later, the sound of a wagon rolling into the yard interrupted her chores. Clara looked out to see Elijah Wade climbing down from the seat of his buckboard. Elijah was a free man who lived 10 miles east, a handyman and trader who knew the rhythm of the plains better than anyone. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that saw everything but judged little. "Morning, Miss Clara," Elijah said, tipping his wide-brimmed hat. "Brought the feed corn your mama ordered, and some headache powder from town." "Thank you, Elijah," Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mama is in the garden. I will show you where to put the sacks." Elijah hauled the heavy sacks of corn into the barn as if they were filled with feathers. As he stacked them, he paused, looking at the empty stall where Clara had found Noah. He looked at the fresh straw Clara had scattered there to hide the blood stains. He turned to Clara, his face impassive. "You got a coyote problem, Miss Clara." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Why do you ask?" Saw some tracks by the creek, Elijah said slowly. And the straw here is kicked up, like something was dragging itself. Clara gripped the door frame. Elijah was sharp. He had survived in a country that did not want him by being invisible and knowing things before others did. We had a sick calf, Clara lied, the falsehood coming easier this time, which terrified her. It died. I buried it. Elijah looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the tension in her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes. He glanced toward the house, then back to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch of tobacco, though he didn't roll a cigarette. Sheriff Pratt is riding hard these days, Elijah said, his voice lowering to a rumble. He is stopping every wagon. Says he is looking for a killer. But I saw the body of that stage driver, Miss Clara. I saw it before they moved him. Clara held her breath. And I have seen what arrows do. I have seen what Comanche lances do, Elijah said. That driver was not killed by a lance, and the man who did it was not interested in the mail. He was interested in making a mess. He let the implication hang in the hot air between them. Elijah knew something was wrong with the official story, and he suspected Clara knew it too. You be careful, child, Elijah said gently. The law out here changes depending on who is holding the gun. If you need heavy lifting, or if you need eyes in the back of your head, you leave a blue cloth on the gatepost. I will see it. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, Elijah. He nodded, climbing back onto his wagon. He had not asked. He had not been accused. He had simply offered his hand in the dark. The wound on Noah's side began to fester on the fourth day. The heat of the cellar was not helping, and the smell of infection, sweet and rotting, began to rise. Clara knew she needed something stronger than water and soap. She rode to the Kincaid place, 5 miles south. Della Kincaid was a widow like Martha, a midwife who had birthed half the children in the county and buried the other half. She was a woman of few words and deep pockets. I need the yellow salve. Della, Clara said, standing in the cluttered front room of Della's cabin. And the willow bark tincture. Della looked up from her quilting. She peered over her spectacles. You look healthy enough. Clara, and Martha is too mean to get an infection. It is for the horse, Clara said, her voice faltering. A barbed wire cut. It is bad. Della stood up. She walked to her cabinet, the jars clinking as she moved them. She took down a pot of pungent yellow ointment and a bottle of dark liquid. She placed them on the table. That is a lot of medicine for a horse, Della said dryly. She looked Clara dead in the eye. Horses do not usually need the willow bark for pain. Men do. Clara opened her mouth to defend herself, but Della held up a hand. I do not want to know, Della said. Ignorance is the only shield I have left at my age, but you clean the wound with boiled salt water first, then pack it with this. Change it twice a day, and burn the old bandages. Do not bury them. Burn them. Clara took the jars, her fingers brushing Della's rough hand. I will pay you when the harvest comes. Pay me by staying alive, Della said, turning back to her quilt. Back at the station. The routine continued, but the stakes felt higher. Rourke came by twice that week. He did not come to the door. He rode the perimeter of the fence, his silhouette cutting a dark shape against the setting sun. He was watching. He was waiting for a mistake. One evening, Rourke rode right up to the porch. Martha was inside, and Clara was sweeping the steps. Evening, Clara, Rourke said, leaning forward on his saddle horn. His horse stomped, kicking up dust. You look tired. Hard work for a girl running this place. We manage, Mr. Rourke, Clara said, not stopping her sweeping. I saw Elijah Wade's wagon here, Rourke said, his eyes narrowing. You want to be careful with that one. He forgets his place. He brings us corn. He is honest, Clara said defensively. Rourke laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Honesty is a luxury. Clara, survival is a necessity. I heard Pratt found a camp up near the ridge. Empty, but fresh. He thinks your Indian friend is still close. He looked at the ground, at the cellar vent hidden by the rose bushes. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought he must hear it. If he is close, Rourke said softly. "He will make a mistake. They always do. They get hungry. They get careless. And when he does, I hope you are not standing in the crossfire." He tipped his hat and rode off. Clara stood frozen, the broom gripping in her hands until her knuckles turned white. He was circling closer. That night, she went down to the cellar. Noah was sitting up, the fever finally gone thanks to Della's salve. He looked stronger, the lines of pain around his mouth easing. "You need air," Clara whispered. "The cellar is too damp." "Dangerous," Noah said. His English was improving, picking up words from her whispers. "The moon is new. It is dark." Clara said, "Come, to the barn. Just for an hour." Getting him up the ladder was a struggle, but he moved with a fluid grace despite the injury. They crossed the yard in silence, shadows moving within shadows. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled of hay and horses, a clean, living smell compared to the stagnant cellar. Noah inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. He leaned against the stall door, looking out through the cracks in the wood at the night sky. "You stare," he said, opening his eyes to find Clara watching him. "I am watching for riders," Clara said, looking away. "No," Noah said. He reached out and touched the sleeve of her dress. "You stare at the wind, but you do not see it." He moved to the open window. He pointed to the tall grass beyond the fence line. It was swaying gently in the night breeze. "Look," he commanded softly. Clara looked. "It is just grass." "No, look at the break." He pointed a long finger. "Grass bends with wind, smooth, but there." Clara squinted. In the sea of swaying grass, there was a patch that moved differently. It was stiff, broken. "Deer passed there," Noah said. "1 hour ago. Grass has not stood back up." He pointed to the ground near the gate. "Dust. You look at your feet. You should look at the edges." He knelt, wincing slightly, and traced a pattern in the dirt. Horse walks heavy. Pushes dirt out. The man walks softly. Pushes dirt down. If you see dirt pushed out, you know speed. If you see dirt pushed down, you know stealth. Clara watched him, fascinated. He was no longer the invalid in the cellar. He was a teacher. He was showing her a world that had existed right in front of her eyes for 24 years. A world she had never seen. "Why do you teach me this?" she asked. Noah looked at her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face. "Because you are blind, and the blind die." It was a harsh truth, but spoken without malice. He was giving her tools. He was paying for his life with knowledge. Over the next few nights, the lessons continued. He taught her to smell the difference between wood smoke and grass fire. He taught her to listen to the birds if the jays were screaming. A predator was near. If the crickets stopped, a man was walking. The dynamic between them shifted. Clara stopped seeing him as a burden she was carrying. She began to see him as an equal, perhaps even a superior in this harsh land. He possessed a quiet dignity that Rourke and his men lacked. He did not take more than he needed. He mended his own clothes. When she brought him food, he always left a small portion, a habit she didn't understand until he told her it was for the spirits, a thanks for the life he still had. The fear of treason began to fade, replaced by a strange, quiet intimacy. It was not a romance of words or touches. It was the intimacy of shared secrets. One night, a week after his arrival, a sound woke Clara. It was a dull thud from the yard. She grabbed her Winchester and ran to the back door, her heart racing. Has Rourke come back? Had the posse found them? She threw the door open, raising the rifle. Noah was standing by the stable door. He was in the shadows, almost invisible. But she knew his shape now. He was not hiding. He was standing guard. He held a pitchfork in his hand, his body tense and ready. Clara scanned the yard. A coyote scrambled over the fence, a stolen chicken in its jaws. Just a coyote. She lowered the rifle, letting out a breath. She looked at Noah. He did not lower the pitchfork until the coyote was gone. Then he turned to her. He nodded once, a silent message. "I am watching. You are safe." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. For years, She and Martha had been alone. Two women holding back the dark with nothing but a shotgun and stubbornness. They had always been the prey. Now, with this stranger standing in the shadows of her barn, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. She felt protected. She walked to the edge of the porch. "Go back down. Noah, it is almost dawn." He moved toward the house, silent as a ghost. As he passed her, he paused. The distance between them was less than a foot. She could smell the sage he had rubbed on his skin to mask his scent, and the faint, clean smell of the rain that was coming. "Clara," he said. He said her name perfectly this time. No hesitation. "Good night, Noah," she whispered. He slipped into the kitchen and vanished beneath the floorboards. Clara stood on the porch for a long time, watching the sun begin to bleed over the horizon. The floorboard in the kitchen was no longer just a piece of wood. It was a boundary. Above it was the world of lies, of Rourke's greed, of Pratt's incompetence, of a town that wanted to take everything she had. Below it was the truth. She went inside and made coffee. When Martha woke up, complaining about the heat and the taxes, Clara listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She was listening to the wind, checking the grass for breaks, and knowing, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her, that she would not give him up. Not today, not tomorrow. The rising action had begun, not with a gunshot, but with a quiet decision made in the gray light of dawn. She was no longer just hiding a mistake. She was harboring an ally, and the world outside the gate was about to realize that the Hollis women were no longer alone. The peace of the morning was shattered not by a rooster's crow, but by the splintering of wood. The front door of the Hollis station did not open. It was kicked inward, the latch snapping with a violence that echoed through the small house. Clara dropped the cast-iron skillet she had been scrubbing. Martha was already moving, reaching for the shotgun mounted above the hearth, but a heavy boot slammed down on the weapon before she could lift it. 3 men filled the kitchen. They were not Sheriff Pratt's deputies. These men smelled of stale whiskey, unwashed bodies, and old blood. They were bounty hunters, the kind of men who sold human lives by the pound. The leader, a man with a beard that looked like a tangled bird's nest and eyes that held no light, slapped a piece of paper onto the kitchen table. "Warrant," he grunted. His voice was thick with phlegm. "Authorized by the county magistrate. Searching for a fugitive, a Comanche buck. Killer." "We have been searched," Martha said, her voice shaking with rage rather than fear. She stood her ground, though the man towered over her. "Sheriff Pratt was here 3 days ago." "Pratt is soft," the man sneered. He looked around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the loose floorboards near the pantry. Clara felt her heart hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Pratt looks with his eyes. We look with our knives." He signaled to his companions. "Tear it apart. If there is a rat in the walls, smoke it out." The destruction was systematic and cruel. They overturned the mattress in the bedroom. They pulled the linen from the shelves. They smashed a jar of peaches, one of the last 3 against the wall, just to watch the syrup run like amber blood. Clara stood by the stove, her hands clenched into fists. She could do nothing. To fight was to die. To speak was to give Noah away. She prayed to a God she hadn't spoken to in years that Noah would stay silent in the dark beneath their feet. The leader walked over to Clara. He was close enough that she could smell the tobacco rot on his breath. He reached out and touched a lock of her hair. Clara flinched, pulling back. "Pretty thing like you," he murmured, his grin revealing yellow teeth. "Living out here alone? It is not right. A woman needs a man to keep the wolves away." "We have dogs for wolves," Clara said, her voice ice cold. "And we have no fugitives here. Take your paper and leave." The man laughed. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We are not just looking for an Indian girl, mister. Rourke says this land is going to be his. Says you two are just squatters waiting to be evicted. Maybe we will find an Indian. Maybe we will find you hiding him. Either way, you lose." He straightened up and kicked the leg of the table. "Let us check the barn." They left the house as abruptly as they had entered, leaving a wreckage of broken crockery and torn fabric in their wake. Clara rushed to the window. She watched them tear through the stable, tossing hay, kicking the stalls. They did not find him. Not yet. But as they rode away, the leader turned in his saddle and spat on the gatepost. It was a promise. They would be back. "He cannot stay here," Martha said. She was kneeling on the floor, picking up the shards of the peach jar. Her hand was bleeding where a piece of glass had cut her, but she did not seem to notice. "They know. Clara. They do not have proof, but they smell it." Clara looked at the pantry floor. "I know. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, they moved him." Noah was stronger now. The yellow salve had drawn the poison from his wound, and though he moved with a stiff, guarded gait, he could walk. Clara led him out the back door, past the garden, and toward the dry creek bed that cut through the property 1/2 mile north. "Where do you want to go?" Noah asked. His voice was low, blending with the rustle of the wind in the mesquite. "The limestone ridge," Clara whispered. "There is a crevice behind the old cottonwood tree. It is small, but it is dry, and from there you can see the road." They reached the spot an hour later. It was a narrow fissure in the rock face, hidden by a curtain of dried vines and brush. It was a hard place, a place for coyotes and lizards, not people, but it was safe from prying eyes. Clara handed him a bundle, a blanket, a canteen of water, and a strip of dried beef. "I will come when I can, but I have to be careful. They are watching." Noah took the bundle. He looked at the rock, then out at the dark expanse of the prairie. He looked back at her. "You go. Run back. Do not look behind." He understood the hunt better than she did. He knew that looking back left a trail. The days that followed were a game of cat and mouse. Clara could feel the eyes on her every time she stepped out of the house. Riders appeared on the ridges, silhouettes against the harsh sun, watching the station. Rourke's men. Supplying Noah became a dangerous dance. Clara would fill a water bucket and walk toward the creek, pretending to check the fence line. She would drop a piece of bread or a wrapped package of cheese into a hollow log or under a specific rock, never looking toward the crevice. She never saw him take it, but when she returned the next day, the food was gone. The pressure from the town began to mount. On Sunday, Clara drove the wagon into adobe walls for supplies. The atmosphere in the general store was thick enough to choke on. Conversation stopped when she entered. Women she had known since childhood turned their backs to inspect bolts of calico. Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, approached her with a flour barrel. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "We were just talking about you. It is terrible. 2 women alone out there with a killer on the loose. We are managing." "Mrs. Gable," Clara said, hoisting a sack of flour. "Are you Mrs.?" Gable lowered her voice. "People are talking. Dear, they say you are stubborn. Mr. Henderson lost his wife last winter. He is a good man. He has a solid house in town. If you were to consider an arrangement, you could sell that dusty patch of land and be safe. Mr. Henderson is 60 years old and chews tobacco in his sleep," Clara said sharply. "And I am not looking for a husband to hide behind." "It is not about hiding. Clara—" "Mrs." Gable snapped, her smile vanishing. "It is about knowing your place. A woman alone is a target. If you do not bend, you will break. And this town will not mourn you when you do." Clara walked out of the store, her face burning. The message was clear. Conform, sell to Rourke, or face the consequences alone. 2 days later, the violence escalated from threats to action. Clara was riding the perimeter of the north pasture, checking for breaks in the wire. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed down on her shoulders. She was miles from the house, near the edge of the canyon where the land dropped away into a rocky gorge. She heard the rumble before she saw the cause. It sounded like thunder rolling across the ground. She crested a small rise and froze. Below her, a herd of 50 steer was stampeding. They were running blind, panicked, kicking up a wall of red dust that obscured the sun. And behind them, firing pistols into the air, were 2 of Rourke's riders. They were driving the herd straight toward her. straight toward the drop-off. Clara wheeled her horse, kicking his flanks. "Go run!" The gelding bolted, terrified by the noise and the scent of fear from the cattle. But the ground was uneven, littered with gopher holes and loose shale. The herd was gaining, a juggernaut of muscle and horn. The noise was deafening, a roar that vibrated in her teeth. She pushed the horse toward the higher ground, toward the rocky outcroppings of the ridge. But a steer broke from the group, cutting her off. Her horse shied violently, rearing up. Clara was thrown. She hit the ground hard. The air knocked from her lungs. She rolled, gasping, tasting dirt and blood. The roar of the herd was on top of her. She scrambled backward, her hands tearing at the scrub brush, trying to find purchase. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting hooves. Instead, she saw a hand. Noah was there. He had emerged from the rocks like a spirit of the land itself. He did not look panicked. He looked focused. He grabbed her forearm, his grip like iron. Up! He hauled her to her feet and pulled her into a narrow fissure between two boulders just as the lead steer slammed into the rock face where she had been lying a second before. The herd thundered past, a river of brown hides and terrified eyes. The ground shook. Dust filled the air, choking them, blinding them. Noah pressed her back against the stone, shielding her body with his own. He held her tight, one hand on the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder to protect her from the grit. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, locked together in the small space, surrounded by the smell of crushed sage, cattle sweat, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. When the last of the herd had passed, vanishing over the ridge and into the canyon, the silence that returned was ringing. Clara coughed, her legs giving way. She slid down the rock face to sit in the dirt. Noah crouched beside her. He checked her arms, her head, his hands moving with a quick, professional efficiency. "Broken?" he asked.
"No,"
Clara gasped, wiping dust from her eyes.
"Just bruised. You saved me."
"Men drove them," Noah said, his voice hard. He looked toward the ridge where Rourke's riders had disappeared. "They want you dead, or afraid."
"Both,"
Clara whispered. The sun was setting, and the temperature began to plummet. The desert was a land of extremes. It would burn you by day and freeze you by night. The stampede had scattered Clara's horse. It was gone. They were miles from the station, and walking back in the dark with Rourke's men prowling was suicide. "Cannot go back," Noah said, reading the sky. "Night comes, we stay." He led her deeper into the rocks, to a small overhang that had been used by shepherds for decades. He gathered dried mesquite and tumbleweed, building a small fire deep in the recess where the light would be hidden from the plains below. The night air bit at their skin. Clara shivered, her coat torn from the fall. Noah sat across the small fire from her. He watched the flames, his profile sharp and unreadable. "You should have let me fall," Clara said softly. "If they had seen you." "They did not see," Noah said. "They look at cows. White men do not look at rocks." He moved closer, seeing her shiver. He unbuttoned the heavy wool vest he wore, a garment he must have scavenged or stolen weeks ago, and draped it over her shoulders. It held his warmth. "Thank you," she said. She looked at him, really looked at him. The firelight softened the angles of his face. He was young, perhaps a year or two younger than her, but his eyes held the weight of 100 years. "Noah," she asked, the question hanging in the air, "are you afraid of me? What could I do to you?" He looked at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He shook his head slowly. "No." "Why?" "You have fear," he said quietly. "But you have honor. You hide the enemy. You bring food. A woman with no honor would have sold me for silver." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. He traced a line in the dust between them. "I fear the men with the paper. I fear the men who drive the cows. I do not fear you." Clara felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to bridge the distance between them. It was not just gratitude. It was a recognition of a kindred spirit. They were both outcasts in their own way, him by blood, her by circumstance. "I'm afraid," Clara admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid of the world out there. I'm afraid of losing the land. I'm afraid of being alone." "You are not alone," Noah said. He took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused from survival, but his touch was gentle. Clara leaned into him, seeking the warmth of another living soul. In the cold silence of the canyon, surrounded by a world that wanted to crush them both, they found a fragile peace. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly. There were no words left to say. There was only the fire, the cold wind outside, and the beat of two hearts that had decided to survive together. The darkness of the cave swallowed them, wrapping them in a protective embrace that the world outside denied them. The next morning broke with a gray, steel light. They walked back to the station separately, using the brush for cover. When Clara reached the gate, she saw a splash of blue fabric tied to the fence post. Elijah. She ran to the barn. Elijah Wade was there, pretending to examine the shoe of the plow horse. When he saw Clara, he straightened up. His face was grim. "Where were you, girl?" he asked slowly. "Your mama is half out of her mind." I lost my horse," Clara said. "I had to walk." Elijah studied her face, noting the torn coat and the dust, but he did not press. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found it," he whispered. "I went through the trash burn at the back of the sheriff's office. The deputy, a boy named Miller, is sloppy. He did not burn it all." Clara took the paper. It was singed at the edges, smelling of ash. It was a receipt from the general store in town, dated 2 days before the stagecoach robbery. 6 boxes, 44 caliber cartridges, Henry rifle standard, and at the bottom, signed in a sprawling, arrogant hand, account of S. Rourke. "Rourke bought the bullets," Clara whispered. "And look at the countersign," Elijah said, pointing to a scrawl next to the date. "That is Deputy Miller's mark. He verified the sale. Why would a deputy verify a sale of ammo for a rancher unless he was being paid to look the other way?" "They planned it," Clara said, the realization settling like a stone in her gut. "Rourke had his men hit the coach. He used the Henry rifles. He made it look like a war party to bring the cavalry down, to scare everyone into selling. And Pratt knows." "Pratt suspects," Elijah corrected. "But Pratt is a man who likes his pension. He's afraid of Rourke. Without proof, hard proof, he will do nothing." "We have this," Clara said, holding up the receipt. "It is a start," Elijah said. "But it is just paper. Rourke will say he bought ammo for hunting. He will say he lost it. We need something that ties the killer to the scene, something that cannot be explained away." A shadow moved in the doorway of the barn. Elijah spun around, his hand going to the knife at his belt. Noah stood there. He had followed Clara back, unable to let her walk into the lion's den alone. He looked at Elijah, then at the paper in Clara's hand. He stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He held it out to Clara. It was a silver locket. It was dented and stained with blood, but the engraving was clear. It was a delicate, feminine thing, a lady's locket. Clara opened it. Inside was a tiny, hand-painted portrait of a smiling young woman and a lock of blonde hair. "Where did you get this?" Clara asked, her voice breathless. "The man," Noah said. "On the coach. The one who fights. The driver." "No," Noah said, struggling with the words. "The passenger. The man in suit. He shot at me. I fight him. He dropped this. Then, big boom. The Rourke man shot him. I'll take it." Clara looked at Elijah. "The passenger. The newspaper said a government surveyor was on that coach. A man from Washington is coming to survey the water rights." Elijah's eyes widened. "If Rourke killed a federal surveyor, that is not just murder. That is treason. That brings the marshals." "Noah," Clara said, gripping the locket. "Did you kill anyone?" Noah looked her in the eye. "I killed the rabbit. I killed deer. I do not kill men on the coach. I run, they shoot me. He touched the locket. This is true. Clara closed her fist around the cold silver. They had the bullet receipt. They had the victim's personal effect, taken by a witness who was there. They had the truth. But truth was a dangerous thing to hold. We have to go to town, Clara said, her voice steady. We have to take this to Pratt, in public, where Rourke cannot hide it. It is a suicide run. Miss Clara, Elijah warned. Rourke has men on every road. Then we do not take the road, Clara said. She looked at Noah. We take the broken lands. We take the path they do not know. She looked at the horizon. The time for hiding was over. The time for running was done. It was time to ride into the storm. Tonight, Clara said, we leave tonight. The plan was born in the desperate quiet of the pre-dawn hours. It was a plan stitched together with hope and the cold, hard steel of the truth. They would not run. To run was to admit guilt. To run was to leave the land to the vultures. They would ride straight into the heart of adobe walls, to the steps of the sheriff's office, and they would lay the dead man's locket and the merchant's receipt on the table before God and the county. But plans in the West were often rewritten by the landscape itself. The main road is watched, Elijah Wade warned, checking the harness of his wagon. The lantern light cast deep shadows on his worried face. Rourke has men at the bridge and the crossroads. He is squeezing the net. Then we take the Devil's Cut, Clara said. She was checking the load in her Winchester. Her hands no longer trembled. Fear had burned away, leaving only a crystalline focus. It is narrow. A wagon cannot pass easily, but horses can. I will take the wagon the long way, Elijah said, nodding to Della Kincaid, who sat on the buckboard seat, her face grim and set like stone. Beside her, hidden under a pile of wool blankets, lay a man who groaned softly with every movement. Mr. Abernathy, the stagecoach guard who had crawled into the brush and survived on rainwater and spite until Della found him. He was the living gun that would end the war. We met at the sheriff's office, Clara said. She looked at Noah. He was mounted on the gelding they had recovered, looking uncomfortable in a settler's coat she had forced him to wear to hide his paint. At high noon, they rode out under the cover of a fading moon. The air was thick with dust, tasting of sage and impending violence. The Devil's Cut was a scar in the earth, a narrow pass between two towering walls of red sandstone. It was a place where the sun reached the bottom only at midday, a place of deep shadows and echoing silence. As Clara and Noah rode into the mouth of the pass, the silence felt heavy. Too heavy. Noah pulled the gelding up short. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring. He did not need to speak. Clara saw the tension in his back. He smelled it. Horse sweat, tobacco, gun oil. Back, Noah hissed, reaching for the reins of Clara's horse. But it was too late. From the rocks above, a pebble skittered down. Then, the click of a hammer being cocked echoed like a thunderclap. Hold it right there! A voice boomed from the shadows ahead. Silas Rourke stepped out from behind a boulder, blocking the narrow path. He held a heavy revolver in his hand, casual, as if he were holding a pocket watch. Flanking him were 4 men, the hard cases who had torn apart Clara's kitchen, and behind them, looking pale and sweating despite the morning chill, sat Sheriff Gideon Pratt on his horse. I told you, Clara, Rourke called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. I told you that boy would make a mistake, and his mistake was thinking he could walk into my town. Clara leveled her rifle at Rourke's chest. We are going to the sheriff. Rourke, step aside. The sheriff is right here. Rourke smiled, a wolfish baring of teeth. Sheriff, tell the lady she is under arrest for harboring a fugitive and conspiring to murder a federal agent. Pratt shifted in his saddle. He looked at Clara, then at the ground. Clara, put the gun down. You are in over your head. Just give him up. We can work this out. Work it out, Clara cried, her voice cracking with fury. Like you worked it out for the driver, like you worked it out for the surveyor. Shut up, Rourke snapped. He signaled to his men. Take them down. Kill the buck. Keep the girl alive. She has a deed to sign before she hangs." The men on the ridge raised their rifles. They were trapped in a shooting gallery. Noah moved before the thought fully formed in Clara's mind. He did not fire. He did not run. He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground, slapping Clara's horse hard on the flank to send it scrambling back. Away from him, he walked forward into the open sunlight, his hands held out, palms open. He shed the settler's coat, letting it fall to the dust, revealing the silver band on his arm and the paint on his chest. "Stop!" Noah shouted. His voice was deep, commanding, surprising even Rourke. "I am here. Let her go." Rourke laughed. "Look at that. The savage has a tongue and a noble streak." "Noah, no!" Clara screamed, struggling to control her spooked horse. "Take him," Rourke ordered. Two men rushed forward. Grabbing Noah roughly, they slammed him against the canyon wall. One of them drove a knee into his gut, making him double over, while the other pistol whipped him across the temple. Noah crumpled, blood streaming down his face, but he did not fight back. He looked past the blood, locking eyes with Clara. "Run," his eyes said. "Live." Rourke walked up to Noah, pressing the barrel of his gun against the young man's forehead. This is how it ends. A fugitive killed while resisting arrest. A tragedy. He looked at Pratt. "Write it down. Gideon, resisting arrest." Pratt's hand hovered over his holster. He was sweating profusely. "Silas, we have him. We can take him to jail. We do not need to do this here." "We do it here," Rourke hissed. "Clean. Simple." He cocked the hammer. "Wait." The shout came from the southern end of the pass. The rumble of wheels on stone grew louder, echoing like an approaching storm. Elijah Wade drove his wagon around the bend at a breakneck speed, the horses frothing. He pulled back on the reins, skidding the wagon to a halt sideways, blocking the exit. "You might want to hold that shot, Mr. Rourke," Elijah bellowed. Standing up in the driver's seat, he held a double-barreled shotgun. "Get out of the way, boy, or I will bury you with them." Rourke roared, turning his gun toward the wagon. "I am not the one you need to worry about," Elijah said calmly. He reached back and pulled the tarp off the wagon bed. Della Kincaid sat there, supporting a man who looked like death warmed over. "Mister." Abernathy was pale, his head bandaged, but his eyes were burning with feverish hate as he looked at Rourke. "Hello, Silas," Abernathy rasped. His voice was weak, but in the canyon acoustic, it carried like a bell. Rourke froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been bled. "That is the guard," Pratt whispered, staring. "Tom said he was dead." "I am hard to kill," Abernathy said. He pointed a shaking finger at Rourke. "I saw you. I saw you give the order. I saw your man Miller put the bullet in the surveyor's back." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind whistled through the rocks. The men on the ridge lowered their rifles, uncertain. Killing a Comanche was one thing. Killing a white witness, a known man of the territory, was another. "He is lying," Rourke shouted, but his voice was shrill. "He is delirious. The Indian attacked them." "We have the receipt." "Silas," Clara yelled, pulling the paper from her pocket. She held it high. "The receipt for the .44 caliber rounds, signed by you, verified by Deputy Miller. You bought the bullets that killed those men." She threw the locket onto the ground between them. "And Noah took this from the surveyor. Why would a savage keep a locket and not the scalp? Because he is not the killer. You are." Pratt stared at the receipt, then at the locket, and finally at Rourke. The pieces slammed together. The coercion, the bribes, the fear, it all crystallized into a moment of choice. "Silas," Pratt said, his voice low and dangerous. "Put the gun down." Rourke's eyes darted around. He saw his men hesitating. He saw the witness. He saw the end of his empire. "I own this county," Rourke screamed. "I am the law." He swung his gun not at Pratt, but at the witness. "No!" Clara screamed. The canyon exploded into chaos. Rourke fired. The bullet splintered the wood of the wagon, missing Abernathy by inches as Della pulled him down. Elijah fired both barrels of his shotgun, not at Rourke, but at the rock face above the men on the ridge, sending a shower of shale and dust down on them, blinding them. Noah, seizing the distraction, drove his shoulder into the man holding him. He snatched the man's knife from its sheath and slashed the girth of the nearest horse. The saddle slipped, the horse bucked, and the canyon floor turned into a swirling mosh pit of hooves and dust. "Clara, get down!" Noah shouted, diving for cover behind a fallen boulder. Clara did not get down. She saw Rourke taking aim at Noah's exposed back. She raised the Winchester. She did not aim to kill. She was not a killer. She aimed for the mechanism of action. She fired. The bullet struck the dirt right in front of Rourke's stallion. The horse reared, screaming, throwing Rourke's aim wide. His shot went wild, sparking off the stone wall. Gunfire erupted from all sides. The bounty hunters on the ridge were firing blindly into the dust cloud. Elijah was taking cover under the wagon, firing a pistol he had drawn. Clara slid from her saddle, hitting the ground hard. She scrambled toward Noah. He was moving, staying low, a shadow amidst the chaos. He reached her, grabbing her arm. "Go the rocks," he commanded. "Not without you." A bullet kicked up dirt into Clara's eyes. She cried out, blinded. Noah threw himself over her, shielding her body with his. She felt him jerk violently as a bullet found him not a killing shot, but a hit. "Noah, move," he gritted out. He dragged her, his left leg leaving a trail of blood in the dust, toward the shelter of the wagon where Elijah was holding the line. The air was thick with the acrid smell of black powder. The sound was deafening, the boom of heavy Colts, the crack of rifles, the screams of men and horses. Suddenly, a single, booming shot echoed above the din. It was deeper, louder than the rest. Silence rippled outward from the center of the pass. Sheriff Pratt stood in the middle of the road. Smoke drifted lazily from the barrel of his long-barreled peacemaker. Silas Rourke sat in the dust, clutching his shoulder. His gun lay 5 feet away. He looked up at Pratt with shock. You backstabbing coward!" Rourke gasped. "I am the sheriff," Pratt said, his voice shaking but loud. "And you are under arrest for murder." Rourke's men on the ridge looked at their fallen boss. They looked at the sheriff. They looked at the Winchester in Clara's hand and the shotgun in Elijah's. They were hired guns, loyal only to the coin. The coin had just fallen. One by one, they lowered their rifles. They turned their horses and rode away, fading into the landscape like bad memories. The dust began to settle. The only sound was Rourke's labored breathing and the wind whistling through the Devil's Cut. Clara pulled herself out from under Noah's protective weight. He was pale, clutching his thigh where a bullet had passed through the flesh. He looked at her, checking her for wounds before he even looked at his own. "I am whole," she whispered, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "You are hurt." "Flesh only," Noah grunted, trying to stand but stumbling. Clara caught him. Elijah came running from the wagon to take his other side. They dragged him to the wagon, leaning him against the wheel. Pratt walked over to them. He looked at Noah, then at Clara. He looked older than his years. "He needs a doctor," Pratt said heavily. "We take him to town." "We take him to town," Clara repeated, her voice steady. "But not as a prisoner, as a witness." The procession into adobe walls was something the town would talk about for 50 years. The wagon led the way, with Elijah driving. In the back sat Noah, his leg bound, his head high. Beside him sat the stagecoach guard, the living proof of Rourke's treachery. And riding point, straight-backed and unyielding, was Clara Hollis. Sheriff Pratt rode behind them, with Rourke slumped over his saddle, hands bound. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. A crowd began to gather storekeepers, ranch hands, wives in bonnets. They murmured, pointing at the savage in the wagon, pointing at the blood. Rourke, despite his wound, tried to rally them. "Help me," he shouted to the crowd. "Pratt has turned. He is protecting the Indian who killed your kin. Look at him, he is a savage. The crowd shifted. Prejudice was a deep root, hard to pull. Murmurs of anger began to rise. A rock was thrown. Hitting the side of the wagon, Noah flinched, not from pain, but from the hatred in their eyes. He looked ready to accept his fate. Clara dismounted. She walked to the center of the street, placing herself between the wagon and the mob. She was covered in red dust, her dress torn, her hair wild. She looked like a fury born of the earth. "Stop!" She screamed. The crowd quieted, startled by the raw power in her voice. "You look at him and you see a monster," Clara said, pointing at Noah. "Because it is easy. Because it scares you. But who protected you today? Who protected the law?" She pointed a shaking finger at Rourke. "This man, the man you drink with, the man you sell your land to, he killed the stage driver. He killed the surveyor to steal the water rights. He tried to kill me." She walked over to the wagon and placed her hand on Noah's knee. "This boy, this man, dragged himself into my barn bleeding from Rourke's bullet. He could have killed me in my sleep. Instead, he taught me how to survive. He stepped in front of a gun to save me today, not because he is white, not because he is Comanche, but because he is a man of honor." She looked at Mrs. Gable, at the banker, at the faces she had known all her life. "You told me to sell. You told me to find a man to protect me. Well, I found one." She looked at Noah, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "And he has more courage in his little finger than this whole town has in its spine." She took a breath, her voice dropping to a hush that carried to the back of the crowd. "If the law is only strong when it hits the weak, then it is not law. It is just tyranny with a badge. If you want to hang someone, hang the man who betrayed you for profit. But if you touch him," she put her hand on a revolver, "you go through me." Silence stretched, thin and tight as a wire. Then, slowly, old Dr. Miller, no relation to the deputy, stepped forward from the crowd. He carried his medical bag. "Move aside, Clara," the doctor said gently. "Let me see the boy's leg." It was the crack in the dam. The tension broke. The crowd looked at Rourke with new eyes filled with suspicion and dawning realization. Sheriff Pratt hauled Rourke down from the horse. "Get inside. Silas, we have a long talk ahead." Rourke was dragged into the jail, shouting curses that no one listened to. Clara slumped against the wagon wheel, the adrenaline finally leaving her. Noah reached down, his hand brushing her hair. "You fight well," he whispered. "Like a badger." Clara laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I learned from the best." The hunt for the Comanche was over. The sun beat down on the street. No longer an enemy, but a witness to the truth. The hunt for justice had just begun. The dust of adobe walls had settled, but the silence that followed was not the peace of a church. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where an argument had just ended but was not resolved. Silas Rourke was behind bars, waiting for the circuit judge who would not arrive for another month. The federal marshals had been summoned regarding the murdered surveyor. On paper, the war was over. Noah was a free man, cleared of charges by the testimony of the stage guard and the irrefutable evidence of the receipt. But paper was thin, and the memory of the town was long. The ride back to the Hollis station had been a gauntlet. They did not throw stones this time, but the looks were harder to bear. They were looks of betrayal. Clara Hollis, one of their own, a widow's daughter who should have been meek and afraid, had sided with the other. She had brought the savage into the light and humiliated the most powerful man in the county. When they finally passed through the gate of the station, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the yard. Noah slid from the saddle, his leg buckling slightly before he caught himself against the fence. He did not groan. He simply breathed through his nose, a sharp intake of air that betrayed the agony of the ride. "Into the barn," Clara said softly, moving to help him. "I can walk," Noah said. His voice was rough, but he leaned into her support all the same. They settled him not in the cellar, but in the tack room of the stable. It was a small room, smelling of leather oil and dried sage, but it had a window that looked out onto the prairie. It was above ground. It was a place for a man, not a secret. The days that followed were a slow, grinding friction against the reality of their new life. The physical wounds began to close. Dr. Miller rode out once a week, his buggy clattering over the ruts. He was a professional man, and he treated Noah with cold, clinical efficiency. But he would not drink the coffee Martha offered. He stitched the flesh, but he would not mend the bridge between the station and the town. "The leg is healing," Dr. Miller said one Tuesday. Wiping his hands on a rag, he looked at Clara, his expression guarded. "The muscle will be stiff. He might limp when the cold comes, but he can ride." "Thank you, doctor," Clara said, reaching for the tin of coins. "Keep your money." "Clara," Miller said, snapping his bag shut. "Just heed a warning. The law says he is innocent. But the law does not allow drinking at the saloon on Saturday nights. Rourke has friends, and people do not like being wrong. They feel foolish, and a foolish man is a dangerous man." He drove away without looking back. The isolation was absolute. No wagon stopped for water. The stagecoach line, now under temporary management while the investigation proceeded, routed its teams to the station 20 miles south, bypassing the Hollis place entirely. It was a silent boycott, an economic strangulation meant to finish what Rourke had started. Sheriff Pratt came 3 days after the doctor. He rode alone, looking diminished in the saddle. He sat on the porch with his hat in his hands, refusing to look Noah in the eye when the young man limped out to stand by the door. "The circuit judge is coming in September," Pratt said to the floorboards. "It will be a circus. Clara, reporters from Dallas, maybe even St. Louis." "We will tell the truth again," Clara said, pouring him water he did not ask for. "The truth does not change." Pratt sighed, a sound like a tire leaking air. "The town is restless. There was a fight at the dry goods store yesterday. 2 men arguing about whether you were a hero or a traitor. Windows got smashed." He looked up at her then, his eyes pleading. "Clara, I am trying to keep the peace, but I have 2 deputies and 100 angry men. It would be easier if he moved on." He gestured vaguely toward Noah. "The Comancheria is north, or he could go to the territory, just for a while, until the trial, until tempers cool." Clara stood very still. The wind rustled the dry cornstalks in the garden. "Easier for whom?" "Gideon easier for you." "For everyone," Pratt insisted. "For him, too. Do you think he is safe here?" "A lone Comanche miles from his people. He is a sitting duck." Clara looked at Noah. He stood like a statue, his face impassive. He understood every word. He knew that his presence was the anchor dragging their ship down. "So your solution to injustice is exile," Clara said, her voice dropping to a chill whisper. "We followed the law. We brought the proof. And now you want us to hide again to apologize for surviving." "It is not about apologizing," Pratt said, standing up, frustration coloring his cheeks. "It is about being practical. You are a single woman running a station that makes no money. You are harboring a man who is a lightning rod for hate. I am trying to save your life." "You are trying to save your comfort," Clara snapped. "If we send him away, we are saying they were right. We are saying that he does not belong here because of his blood. I will not do it. Peace purchased with cowardice is just a pause before the next war." Pratt looked at her for a long time. He put his hat on. "You are your father's daughter. Clara, he was a stubborn fool, too. He was a brave man." Martha's voice cut from the doorway. They turned. Martha Hollis stood there, wiping flour from her hands. She looked at Pratt with a gaze that could strip paint. "And he would have kicked you off this porch for suggesting we turn a guest out into the wilderness," Martha said. "Good day, Gideon." Pratt flushed a deep crimson. He touched the brim of his hat and walked to his horse. As he rode away, the silence he left behind was not empty. It was fortified. That evening, the tension in the house broke, but not in the way Clara expected. She was in the barn, pitching fresh hay for the horses. Noah was sitting on a crate, mending a tear in a leather bridle. His hands were strong and sure, working the awl and thread with a patience that fascinated her. The air was warm, smelling of summer dust and animals. It was intimate in the way that shared labor always is. They did not need to speak to know where the other was. "Sheriff is right," Noah said suddenly. He did not look up from the leather. Clara paused, leaning on the pitchfork. "He is scared. Fear makes men say stupid things. He speaks the truth of the world," Noah said. He set the bridle down and looked at her. His eyes were dark pools that reflected the lantern light. "I stay. You lose trade. You lose friends. The stage does not come. The money does not come. We will manage," Clara said stubbornly. "The rains will come. The grass will grow. We can sell the hay." "It is not just money," Noah said. He stood up, testing his weight on the bad leg. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. The space between them was charged, electric with the things they had not said during the nights in the canyon. "They speak of you, bad words. They say you are unnatural. They say you lay with savageness." Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "Let them talk. Words are just wind. Words are stones," Noah corrected gently. "They build a wall around you. I do not fear death, Clara." "I have seen death many times. I fear—" He hesitated, searching for the English words to match the feeling in his chest. "I fear I am the stone that buries you." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not touching. "I should go. To the plains. I will be safe." Clara dropped the pitchfork. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor. She stepped into the space he had left, closing the distance until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not decide for me what I can bear." She looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "All my life, I've been told what to be. Be a good daughter. Be a safe widow's child. Hide in the cellar. Don't look at the horizon. I lived in a box. Noah, a box made of fear." She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, scarred, and warm. "You broke the box. When I pulled you from that floor, I stopped waiting for the world to give me permission to live. If you leave now, to save me, you are just putting me back in the dark." Noah looked at her, really looked at her, with a mixture of wonder and sorrow. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. It was a gesture of profound connection, shocking in its simplicity. "I am not a white man," he said softly. "I cannot give you a house in town. I cannot give you safety." "I do not want safety," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I want to stand on my own porch and not look down when a man rides by. I want to keep what is mine." She squeezed his hand. "Stay, not as a fugitive, not as a charity case. Stay as my partner. We will work the land. We will make them see." Noah stood silent for a long moment, the conflict warring behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. He lifted her hand and pressed it briefly to his forehead, a gesture of respect, of a promise made without ink or paper. "I stay," he breathed. The moment was broken by the sound of the dinner bell ringing from the house. It was a sharp, mundane sound that pulled them back to earth. But the air in the barn had changed. The line had been crossed, not into a scandalous affair, but into a deep, abiding alliance. Martha's transformation was quieter, less dramatic, but no less seismic. She watched Noah. She watched him work even when his leg throbbed. She watched him carry water for her garden without being asked. She watched the way he treated Clara, not with the possessive arrogance of the town suitors, but with a watchful reverence. One morning, Clara came into the kitchen to find Martha packing a basket. "The eggs are fresh," Martha said without turning around. "And I baked extra biscuits. That boy, Noah, he is too thin. The healing takes fuel." Clara stood in the doorway, stunned. Martha had never called him by his name before. It had always been him, or the boy. "Thank you, Mama," Clara said softly. Martha turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was lined with the years of hardship, but the hardness in her eyes had softened. "I was wrong, Clara, about safety." "Mama, I thought if we stayed small, if we stayed quiet, the world would pass us by and leave us be," Martha said, looking out the window at the empty road. "But the world does not work that way. Rourke would have taken the land whether we were quiet or loud. You were right to fight." She walked over and smoothed Clara's hair, a gesture she hadn't made since Clara was a child. "He is a good worker. He has quiet feet. A woman could do worse than a man with quiet feet and steady hands." It was as much of a blessing as Clara would ever get, and it was enough. Elijah Wade became their lifeline. He ignored the town's scorn, driving his wagon up to their gate with a defiance that bordered on glee. He brought nails. He brought lumber. He brought news. "The stage line is hurting," Elijah said one afternoon, sitting on the porch while Noah whittled a new handle for the axe. "The detour adds 4 hours to the trip. The passengers are complaining about the dust and the rough road south. The company is losing money." "Let them lose it," Martha said, snapping beans into a bowl. "Money has a loud voice," Elijah said with a grin. "Louder than prejudice. Give it a month. They will be back. And when they come back, you raise the price of the water." "Elijah," Clara warned, though she was smiling. "I am serious," Elijah said. "That is the law of the West. Miss Clara. Supply and demand. You have the best water. They have thirsty horses. Make them pay for the inconvenience of their stupidity." He looked at Noah. "And you, son, I found a man in Amarillo who buys horsehair rope. He pays fair. If you can braid more of that." He pointed to the intricate rope Noah was making. "I can sell it. We split the profit." Noah looked up. 70-30. Elijah threw his head back and laughed, a rich, booming sound. "You learn fast, 60-40, and I will bring you tobacco." "Done," Noah said, a rare smile touching his lips. It was the beginning of a new economy for the Hollis station. They were no longer just surviving. They were building. The symbolic turning point came on a Sunday, a month after the trial. The heat had finally broken, and the first hints of autumn were in the wind. Clara stood in the kitchen, looking at the loose floorboards near the pantry. For weeks, they had walked around them, stepping carefully out of habit. The space beneath was empty now, save for the memories of fear and blood. "Noah," Clara called. He came in from the porch, wiping mud from his boots. "Yes, help me with this," she said. Together, they pried up the loose boards. The hole gaped black and empty. "We need to fix this," Clara said. "Properly. No more loose boards. No more hiding places." Noah nodded. He went to the barn and brought back the hammer and the bag of new nails Elijah had brought. He measured the wood, his movements precise. Clara held the lantern while he worked. He set the boards flush, eliminating the gaps. He drove the nails in deep, the sound of the hammer ringing through the house like a bell tolling the end of an era. Bang, bang, bang. When he was finished, the floor was solid. There was no way in, no way to slip beneath the surface. "Good," Noah said, running his hand over the wood. "Now," Clara said, pointing to the pantry shelves, "we fill the cellar from the outside entrance. We fill it with potatoes, with squash, with corn. It is a root cellar, Noah, not a grave." They spent the rest of the day harvesting the late garden. They filled the cellar with food for the winter. They transformed the space of concealment into a space of sustenance. It was a labor of reclamation. As the weeks turned into months, the rhythm of the station changed. The rains came, turning the red dust into mud, then into a carpet of green. The grass on the prairie, which had been burned brown by the drought and the stampede, began to push through the char. They fixed the roof. They rebuilt the corral fence, making it higher and stronger. Noah worked the horses, his limp fading to a barely noticeable hitch in his stride. He had a way with the animals that was almost supernatural. He did not break them. He convinced them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold, Clara stood by the gate. She watched the road, Far off in the distance, a dust cloud appeared. It was rhythmic, heavy. She heard the sound of the stagecoach horn, a long, mournful blast that signaled approach. Martha came out to the porch. Noah stepped out of the barn, holding a coil of rope. The stagecoach was coming back. It slowed as it approached the gate. The driver was a new man, not Tom. He looked at the station, then at the repaired fence, then at the tall Comanche man standing calmly next to the white woman. The driver hesitated. Then he pulled the brake. The coach ground to a halt. "Water," the driver called out, his voice tentative. Clara walked to the gate. She did not open it immediately. She stood there, her hand on the latch. She looked the driver in the eye. "Water is 5 cents a bucket," Clara said clearly. "And the passengers treat this house with respect. Or you can keep driving to the southern route." The driver looked at his tired team. He looked at the long, dark road ahead. He looked at the resolve in Clara's face. 5 cents is fair," the driver said. He tipped his hat. Clara opened the gate. As the horses filed into the trough, Noah moved to help unhitch the team. The driver stiffened for a second, his hand twitching toward the shotgun on the seat. "He helps with the traces," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension. "He is the station master." The driver looked at Noah. Noah looked back, his gaze steady, unchallenging but unyielding. "All right then," the driver muttered. "Much obliged." It was not a parade. It was not a celebration. But as Noah worked the leather straps, and Clara began to pump the water, and Martha brought out a tray of fresh biscuits for the passengers, the victory was absolute. They had not run. They had not hidden. They had stayed, and the world had been forced to widen its path to accommodate them. That night, after the stage had gone, leaving behind silver coins in the jar and a sense of normalcy, Clara and Noah sat on the porch. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and sage. "We did it," Clara whispered. Noah was whittling a small piece of cedar. He blew the shavings away. "We begin." "You are not afraid anymore?" Clara asked. "Of the stone that buries me." Noah looked at the solid floor of the porch, then at the repaired roof, and finally at her. "You are not a flower, Clara," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "You are mesquite, strong roots. Stones do not bury mesquite. They only hold the earth for it." He handed her the piece of wood he had been carving. It was small, simple. It was a figure of a horse, head up, running. "For the window," he said. Clara took it. She felt the warmth of his hand linger on the wood. She looked at the horizon, where the stars were beginning to puncture the velvet dark. She was 24 years old. She had a mother who had found her courage, a friend who drove a wagon like a chariot, and a partner who had walked out of the Stone Age to stand beside her. She had a debt to pay, a farm to run, and a town that still watched her with suspicion. But as she sat there in the dark, her shoulder brushing against Noah's, Clara Hollis realized she had never been richer. The falling action was over. The ground had settled, and on this solid earth, they would build something that would last. The seasons in the Texas Panhandle did not change gently. They broke. The summer that had brought the drought and the violence had eventually shattered under the weight of autumn storms. And the winter that followed had been a brutal test of ice and isolation. But the Hollis station had stood firm, its timbers groaning but holding against the north wind. Now, a full year after the trial of Silas Rourke, the spring had arrived with a vengeance, painting the prairie in a riot of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. Clara Hollis stood on the front porch, wiping her hands on a clean apron. The station had changed. The roof was patched with fresh cedar shingles that smelled sharp and sweet in the sun. The corral, once holding only a lonely gelding and a milk cow, was now alive with the sound of 6 strong horses, their coats gleaming with health. And above the door, catching the breeze that swept down from the canyon, hung a wind chime made of old silver spoons and bits of polished river glass. It did not sound like a warning. It sounded like laughter. The midday stagecoach was due in 10 minutes. "The biscuits are hot," Martha Hollis called from the kitchen. Her voice had lost the thin, fragile edge of anxiety that had defined it for a decade. It was the voice of a woman who knew her pantry was full. "And tell Noah to wash up. He smells like horse liniment." Clara smiled, stepping off the porch. She walked toward the stable, her boots crunching on the gravel. The path was lined with stones painted white, a small vanity, perhaps, but a declaration that this was a place of order. Inside the stable, the air was cool and dusty. Noah was in the second stall, checking the hoof of a roan mare. He wore denim trousers tucked into high boots, a concession to the work, but his shirt was buckskin, soft and worn, and his hair was still long, braided with the same care as the day she had found him. He had not become a white man. He had not cut his hair or changed his name to Smith. He had simply carved out a space where his world and hers could overlap. "Mama says you smell," Clara said, leaning against the stall door. Noah didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth quivered upward. "I smell like work. It is an honest smell." He released the mare's hoof and straightened up. He was broader in the shoulders than he had been a year ago. The lean, desperate starvation of the fugitive was gone, replaced by the solid muscle of a man who ate 3 meals a day and slept without one eye open. "The stage is coming," Clara said. "Elijah is driving today." "Elijah drives too fast," Noah grunted, grabbing a rag to wipe his hands. "He thinks the mules are racehorses." They walked out into the sunlight together. It was a simple action walking side by side across the yard, but it was a revolution. A year ago, this walk would have drawn whispers, stares, perhaps a gunshot. Today, it was just the station master and the mistress of the house preparing for business. The stagecoach rolled in a few minutes later, kicking up a cloud of golden dust. It was full today. A banker from St. Louis, a family moving west to New Mexico, and a pair of cattle buyers. As the passengers climbed out, stretching their stiff limbs, they looked at the station with relief. The reputation of the Hollis station had spread along the wire. It was known as the cleanest stop between the Red River and the Pecos. It was known for Martha's biscuits and the coldest water in the county. And it was known for something else. The banker, a man with a heavy watch chain and a flushed face, walked up to the water trough. He saw Noah standing there, holding the ladle. The banker hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the braids and the silver band on Noah's arm. "Boy," the banker said, his tone dismissive, "get me a cup, and be quick." The yard went quiet. The family moving west stopped dusting off their clothes. The cattle buyers exchanged a glance. Noah did not move. He did not lower his eyes. He held the ladle calmly, his posture relaxed but rooted like an oak tree. "The cup is there," Noah said, his English clear and unaccented. He nodded to the tin cups hanging on the post. "The water is for all. The service is for those who ask with respect." The banker bristled, his face turning a darker shade of red. "Do you know who I am? I am a vice president of the Union Pacific. I do not take orders from a, 'You will take water, or you will take dust.'" A voice cut in. It wasn't Clara. It wasn't Noah. It was one of the cattle buyers, a weather-beaten man named Henderson who had lived in the county for 30 years. He stepped forward, tipping his hat to Noah. "Afternoon, Noah," Henderson said. "That roan mare ready? I am looking to buy one." "She is ready, Mr. Henderson," Noah said, nodding. "She has a strong gait." Henderson turned to the banker. "Mister, you are new here. This is Noah. He runs the stock. You want water, you help yourself. If you want trouble, you can walk to the next station. It is 20 miles that way." The banker looked around. He saw Clara watching from the porch with her arms crossed. He saw Elijah up on the box, cleaning his fingernails with a knife, watching with amusement. He saw that he was the outlier. The banker swallowed his pride, grabbed a tin cup, and poured his own water. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was small victories like this that built the wall of their safety. It wasn't that the prejudice was gone. It still lurked in the corners of eyes and the hushed tones of the saloon, but the utility of the station, and the undeniable dignity of the man running it, had forced the town to an uneasy truce. The truce was tested 3 weeks later, on a night when the moon was hidden behind thick banks of clouds. Clara and Noah were sitting on the porch, listening to the crickets. The work of the day was done. The lantern cast a warm, yellow circle of light around them. Noah was teaching Clara how to tie a diamond hitch, his fingers guiding hers over the rough rope. Over, then under, he murmured. Tension holds it, not the knot. Like this? Clara asked, twisting the rope. Yes, perfect. The dog's 2 blue ticks Elijah had brought them as puppies suddenly lifted their heads. A low growl rumbled in their throats. Noah went still. He placed his hand over Clara's, stopping her movement. Riders, the stage isn't due, Clara whispered. Not on stage, Noah said. He stood up, blowing out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the porch. Go inside. Bolt the door. I am staying, Clara said, reaching for the Winchester leaning against the wall. Clara! Noah's voice was firm. Inside. She hesitated, then stepped into the doorway, but she did not close the door. She stood in the shadows, the rifle ready. 3 riders emerged from the gloom. They did not come to the gate. They rode right up to the porch, their horses trampling Martha's flower bed. They were drunk. Clara could smell the whiskey from where she stood. They were young men, strangers, likely drift riders from the cattle drive passing north. They were looking for a sport. Hello, the house, one of them shouted, slurring his words. We heard there is a squaw man living here. We heard he has a white woman. Noah stepped out from the shadows of the porch roof. He stepped into the faint light of the stars. He held no weapon in his hands. He stood with his arms loose at his sides. I am here, Noah said. The lead rider laughed, pulling a pistol from his belt. Look at him. Boys, big talk for a savage. We thought we would come teach you some manners. Maybe burn this little shack down just to see the sparks. Go home, Noah said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that cut through the whiskey haze. You are drunk. You have lost your way. I go where I please, the rider shouted, cocking the hammer. And I please put a hole in you. Clara raised the Winchester. She lined up the sights on the rider's chest. Her hand was steady. She would kill him to save Noah. She knew that now. But before she could squeeze the trigger, a sound came from the darkness behind the riders. Click-clack, then another click-clack. From the bunkhouse Elijah had built near the barn, Elijah stepped out with his shotgun. But he wasn't alone. From the shadow of the water tower, 2 men emerged. It was the stagecoach driver, who had stayed over to rest his team, and Mr. Henderson, the cattle buyer who had been sleeping in the guest room. Both held rifles. Put the iron away, son, Henderson said, his voice dry as dust. Unless you want to be buried in a hole nobody will ever find. The drunken riders spun their horses around. They saw the guns. They saw the unified front. They realized, with a sudden, sobering clarity of cold water, that they had ridden into a fortress. We were just having fun, the leader stammered, lowering his gun. Fun is over, Noah said. He took 1 step forward. This is a house of peace. You bring war. You find war. Leave. The riders did not wait for a second invitation. They spurred their horses and galloped into the night, their bravado vanishing with the dust. Noah watched them go. He did not relax until the sound of hoofbeats had faded entirely. Then, he turned and looked at Henderson and the stage driver. Thank you, Noah said. Do not mention it, Henderson said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. I need that roan mare sound for the drive tomorrow. Cannot have fools shooting up the livestock. He winked, then turned back to the bunkhouse. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She lowered the rifle. Her heart was full to bursting. It wasn't just that they were safe. It was that they were no longer alone. The community, the small, transient, rough-hewn community of the road had claimed them. Noah turned to her. He saw the look on her face. He stepped onto the porch and took the rifle from her hands, leaning it against the wall. Enough, he said softly. It is enough. It was the closing of a circle. The protector had become protected, not by charity, but by respect. The wedding, when it happened, was not the grand affair Clara had dreamed of as a girl, with silk ribbons and a church choir. It was better. It took place in late October, when the air was crisp and the sky was a piercing, impossible blue. They stood under the great cottonwood tree by the creek, the only tree for miles that had survived the drought. There was no minister. Noah did not follow the white man's God in the way the town demanded, and Clara had found her own faith in the resilience of the land. Della Kincaid stood before them, holding a small book of civil statutes, but she didn't open it. She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much death and now shone with the rare joy of witnessing life. "We are here to witness a binding," Della said. Her voice was strong, not of property, but of souls. Clara wore a dress of simple blue calico, sewn by her mother. In her hair, she wore a single silver feather that Noah had made for her. Noah wore a new suit of dark wool, but underneath he wore the buckskin shirt, and on his feet were moccasins. Elijah Wade stood as Noah's witness. He beamed, looking younger than his years, a fresh flower tucked into his vest. Martha stood beside Clara, holding a handkerchief she pretended not to need, and 50 yards away, sitting on his horse on the ridge overlooking the creek, was Sheriff Gideon Pratt. He did not come down. He did not join the party, but he raised his hat when they joined hands, a silent acknowledgement, a penance paid in distance and respect. "Do you, Clara Hollis, take this man?" Della asked. "I take him," Clara said, looking into Noah's dark eyes. "For the storm and for the calm. And do you, Noah, do you take this woman?" Noah looked at Clara. He did not just see a woman. He saw the person who had pulled him from the dark, who had given him water when the world wanted blood. "I take her," Noah said. "I protect her. I stand with her, until the grass does not grow." There were no rings. Instead, they exchanged gifts. Clara gave Noah a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, giving him the time of her family. Noah gave Clara a bracelet woven from sweetgrass and leather, bound with silver, giving her the earth of his people. After the ceremony, they ate roast venison and corn pudding at long tables set up in the yard. The stagecoach driver played a fiddle. Elijah danced with Martha, who laughed at a sound Clara hadn't heard in 20 years. As the sun began to set, painting the world in fire, Noah found Martha sitting on the porch swing. He held a plate of cake. "Here," Noah said, offering it to her. Martha looked up at him. For a year, she had called him Noah. She had accepted him, but there was one barrier left. "Thank you. Tosawi," Martha said. She stumbled slightly over the Comanche word, which meant silver brooch, a name he had whispered to Clara in the dark months ago. Noah went still. He looked at the older woman, seeing the fierce love that lay beneath her iron exterior. "You say it good," Noah said softly. "Mother." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She patted the spot beside her on the swing. "Sit down. Eat your cake. You are too skinny." The future did not come all at once. It came in days and seasons. They expanded the garden, digging irrigation trenches that Noah designed, using the slope of the land to bring water from the creek. They planted peach trees to replace the jars that had been broken. They bred the horses, and the Hollis Comanche stock became prized for their endurance and intelligence. Clara and Noah built a life that was a hybrid of their two worlds. They spoke English in the house and Comanche in the fields. They observed the Sabbath, but they also left offerings of tobacco to the four winds when the storms came. One morning, 2 years after the night in the barn, Clara stood at the window of their bedroom. She had asked Noah to cut a new window in the east wall, one that looked directly at the sunrise. Hanging in the frame was the wind chime she had made. It tinkled softly in the morning breeze. She felt a pair of arms wrap around her waist from behind. Noah rested his chin on her shoulder. He was warm, solid, and real. "You look at the light," Noah murmured. "I am looking at the road," Clara said. "The mail rider is early." "Let him wait," Noah said. kissing the side of her neck.
The horses need water. The rider needs patience.
Clara leaned back into him. The fear that had once defined her life was a distant memory, like a nightmare one forgets upon waking. She was no longer the widow's daughter, hiding in the dark. She was Clara. She was the keeper of the gate. She was the wife of a warrior who had traded his lance for a plow but kept his heart wild. "We have to build a new room," Clara said softly. Noah paused. "For guests." Clara turned in his arms. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. It was flat still, but the secret was there, humming with life. "Not for guests," Clara whispered. "For us." Noah stared at her. His eyes widened. The stoic mask he wore for the world crumbled, revealing a joy so raw it stole her breath. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach, his hands trembling as they held her. "A child," he whispered in his own tongue. "A bridge." "A bridge," Clara agreed, stroking his hair. Outside, the sun broke over the horizon, flooding the Texas panhandle with light. It illuminated the red dust, the silver wind chime, and the man and woman standing in the window. They had been hunted, they had been hated, they had been afraid. But they had chosen to stay, and in staying, they had not just survived, they had bloomed. The road ahead would be hard. The world was still a dangerous place, but as Clara looked out at the vast, open land, she knew they could face it, because love was not a magic spell that made the bad men disappear. Love was the daily act of filling the canteen, of mending the fence, of standing at the door and saying, "This is mine. You cannot have it." It was the choice to be the rock that the river could not move. Clara smiled at the sunrise. "Morning, Tosawi," she said. "Morning, Clara," he replied. And the day began. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Clara and Noah as much as I enjoyed writing it. It is a story about courage, prejudice, and the kind of love that is built with work rather than words. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Are you in Texas, London, Hanoi? Let me know if you want more stories like this. Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Do not forget to like the video if it moved you. And if you really want to support the channel and help this story reach more people, please hit that hype button. Your support means the world to me and keeps the campfire burning. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.